The dawn light didn't break through the smog of the industrial ward. It simply diluted the darkness into a bruised, sickly grey. There was no sunrise here, only a slow admission that night had failed to hold. I woke before the bell. Not from rest, from habit. The room was a stone box, just wide enough for a cot and a narrow shelf, its walls sweating with a night's condensation. The air tasted faintly of iron and old steam. Somewhere deep below, the piston lines had already begun their rhythm, slow, deliberate impacts that travelled through the floor, up the frame of the cot, and into my bones. I lay still for a moment, counting them. 1, 2, 3. The spacing was consistent, good pressure in the main line, no irregularities. It steadied me. I had slept for 4 hours. Enough. More than enough for a body that had learned to repair itself between shifts rather than within them. Today, I was leaving. The thought did not come with relief or fear. It settled somewhere deeper, like a measurement taken and accepted. I sat up. The cot creaked in protest, the sound too loud in the small room. For a moment I listened, to the corridor, to the other rooms. Nothing. Either they were still asleep or pretending to be. It didn't matter. On the cot, exactly where I had left it, stood the copper suitcase. It looked wrong in this room, too deliberate, too clean in its intent, even with the dents along its edges and the fine scratches cut into its surface, marks from years of being dragged across workshop floors, shoved under benches, kicked out of the way when space ran short. I knew each of those marks. I had put most of them there. I opened it without sound. The hinges had been adjusted months ago. A drop of oil, a correction in alignment, it obeyed. Voron had said, "Bring your finest tools." He did not need to specify further. I did not reach for the factory issue, no iron hammers, no oversized wrenches meant for men who solved problems by force. Those belonged to the mill. They would remain with it. I took my kit. Each piece had its place, each place had been earned. I began with the calipers, brass, balanced, the arms worn smooth where my fingers rested. I wrapped them in oiled chamois, more out of habit than necessity. They had survived worse. Then the screwdrivers, precision work, bone handles yellowed with time, shaped subtly to my grip. I tested one between my fingers, feeling the familiar resistance, the exact point where pressure translated into motion. No slip, no hesitation. Good. Last, I lifted the small pressure gauge. Silver-plated, though most of the plating had long since dulled. The glass face bore a faint fracture at the edge, a flaw I had stabilized, not removed. The needle rested at 0, steady. I remembered where I had found it, discarded, declared faulty, left in a crate with scrap valves and bent fittings. It had taken me 3 nights to rebuild the chamber, another to recalibrate the spring. It had never lied to me since. I held it for a moment longer than the others, then placed it carefully into the case. These tools knew me, not in the way men claim to know each other, with words and assumptions, but in tolerances, in pressure, in the precise limits of what I could apply without error. In the palace, they would be the only things that did. I closed the suitcase. The latch clicked, soft, final. For a moment I remained seated, listening again to the rhythm beneath the floor. The mill was already awake. It would continue without me. It always did. Then my hand stopped. not on the tools, not on the case, on something I had not planned to take. Beneath the pillow, wrapped in a thin leather folder, lay the only object in the room that did not belong to the East Wing. I slid it out and opened it carefully. A charcoal sketch. Illyra. The paper was cheap, the kind the park artists used along the promenades of the West Wing. But the lines were deliberate, almost patient. Too careful for the coin I had paid. The man had been old, seated beneath one of the iron lamps near the reflecting basin, drawing people who had the time to sit still. We had sat there once. Only once. The other 2 times had been shorter, at the checkpoint fountain between the Central Ward and the West. Shared water, a few measured words, nothing wasted. Enough to establish something. Not certainty, not promise. Direction. In the sketch, her head was turned slightly, as if she had been listening to something beyond the artist's reach. He had captured it well, that distance. Not indifference, just a life already moving along its own line. We had met 3 times. That was all. She worked in the West Wing, in one of the finishing houses where fabric arrived clean and left perfect. No soot, no sulfur. Only quiet machinery and filtered air. When she spoke, she did it softly, as if sound itself carried weight there. She did not speak of escape, only of improvement, rooms with windows that opened without resistance, water that did not taste of metal, soil that produced something other than ironweed. Roses, she had said once, almost as if testing whether the word still belonged in the same world. I had not answered then. I did not need to. The arithmetic was simple. A palace mechanic's wages, if the numbers were accurate, could secure a place in the West Wing in 3 years. Less if the work proved valuable. Input, output, time. The equation held. I was not going to the palace for ambition. I was going because it solved a problem. I studied the sketch for a moment longer. There was no softness added to it. The artist had not tried to bring her closer than she was. Even in charcoal, her eyes carried that same quiet distance, as if she were already measuring the cost of things. She did not know where I was going, not precisely. No one did. But she knew enough to understand that anything connected to the palace, especially beneath it, altered people in ways that were not immediately visible. In Oakhaven, that knowledge traveled without being spoken, like steam through the pipes. I slid the sketch between the pages of my technical manual, paper within paper, something unstructured contained within something exact. That seemed appropriate. The suitcase was already packed. I closed it, and the brass latches met with a controlled click, final, without emphasis. I took my coat from the hook. The fabric was still cold, the lining carrying the faint scent of oil and old metal, the East Wing's mark on everything it touched. For a moment I stood there, the case in my hand, listening. The pistons below. The distant hiss of venting steam. The absence of anything that would call me back. Beyond the walls, somewhere past the Central Ward, the palace waited. Not the new one in the west, the old one, the one beneath. I didn't take the overalls. They were still where I had left them, draped over the back of the chair, stiff with dried grease and marked by work that no longer concerned me. They belonged to the mill, to repetition, to force, to problems solved by pressure rather than precision. The palace required something else. I opened the narrow compartment beneath the shelf and took out the clothes I had kept for the 1 day a week the system allowed a man to appear presentable. The linen shirt came first, clean but worn thin at the cuffs, the stitching along the sleeve slightly uneven where Alira had repaired it last time. I ran my fingers along the seams, checking the tension without thinking. No weakness, no loose threads that could catch or tear under strain. It would hold. The waistcoat followed, dark wool, heavier than necessary but structured enough to impose a shape on the body beneath it. I fastened it carefully, aligning each button without needing to look down. The fabric resisted slightly across the shoulders, limiting movement by a fraction. I noted it, adjusted my posture, and accepted the constraint. Structure had its advantages. The belt required more consideration. I ignored the standard issue and chose the one I had modified myself, reinforced leather, the inner lining cut and re-sewn to hold subtle loops, positioned for balance rather than display. Enough to carry the essential tools without announcing them. Weight distributed evenly, accessible without thought. Function over appearance. The boots came last. Polished, though not perfectly, and still the most expensive thing I owned. I had bought them with a specific purpose in mind: access. They belonged in cleaner districts, on streets where the ground did not shift beneath your feet, and where men were judged before they were tested. I laced them tightly, checking the flex at the ankle and the grip along the sole. Stable, reliable, suitable for transition. Then the coat. The duster was heavy, charcoal grey, worn at the edges but intact. It carried the scent of the east wing no matter how often it was cleaned. Oil, metal, steam embedded too deeply to remove. It would not pass unnoticed in the central ward, but it would pass. That was sufficient. For a moment, I stood still, not adjusting or reconsidering, but assessing. The mirror, a warped sheet of polished metal fixed to the wall, returned an image that did not belong entirely to the mill anymore, but did not yet belong to the palace either. An intermediate state, temporary. I turned away. The suitcase was already packed. I lifted it, feeling the familiar weight settle into my hand, balanced and predictable. I secured the brass latches, the click controlled and final, then moved to the door and placed my hand against the cold iron handle. I paused only to listen. The corridor was already awake, steam moving through pipes, distant voices reduced to fragments, the building maintaining its rhythm without deviation. Nothing had changed, only my position within it. I pulled the door open and the sound of the corridor met me at once. Pressure released into space. I stepped through without slowing, then reached back and closed it, the latch engaging with a clean, mechanical certainty. I did not lock it. There was nothing inside that required protection, and nothing that remained mine. The hallway stretched ahead, iron grating beneath my boots, condensation gathering along the pipes, weak light filtering through narrow, reinforced windows. Each step fell into a steady rhythm, measured and consistent. Workers would already be moving toward the lower levels. Some would notice the difference, the clothes, the direction, the absence of tools in hand. It didn't matter. Observation did not alter the system. At the end of the corridor, the elevator cage waited, its iron frame humming faintly, ready to descend into the deeper arteries of the city. From there, the central ward, the divide, the threshold. Beyond it, the palace. As I moved, a narrow break in the structure revealed the skyline in the distance. The first light was touching the brass domes of the central ward, turning them into something almost deliberate. Not warmth, not promise. Alignment. A fixed point in the system. I kept my pace steady. There was nothing to rush. The path had already been determined.